We'd like to give a special thank you to Ryes and Grind for hosting the Society of Barley Engineers. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone, or should I say, top of the morning. I think it's like 5 a.m. in the UK right now, so I can say that. Hello, everyone. It's been a hot minute since I've given a presentation here. I'm Derek Springer. If you don't know me, I am a member. I was president about 10 years ago. I'm a BJCP judge, and I really love English ales. I know a lot of us here have been drinking beer a long time. You guys probably remember, like in the 90s especially, like English ales was like the craft beer. Everyone wanted to make an English ale because it was like flavorful, which was a revelation in America. So when I kind of first learned what beer was, I learned that like, oh, the good stuff is English, right? Bass Pale Ale. I don't know if they distribute it here anymore, which is very sad. It was probably one of my first favorite beers. Newcastle, not a pale ale exactly, but you know, like a lot of these English beers, when I was a youth, looking to impress people, I would get those because that was the good stuff, right? So English beers, some of my favorites. I'm really glad that I get to share it with you tonight. For anyone that's helping me pass the beers out, I brought a lot, so generous pours. So what am I going to go over tonight? So what makes an English pale ale? Going to go over the styles a bit, building a recipe, and then of course we're going to have a bunch of samples. So I find it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. If you have a lot of beer, people love it. So I hope you guys like it. All right, so first one I'm going to pass around. I'm going to need some help. One of my all-time favorite beers. Absolute tragedy that it's barely distributed anymore. As an aside, if you ever get the opportunity to get the unfiltered double barrel ale, which is sold pretty much only at a Firestone Walker pub, get it. Don't care about anything else. It's the only thing you need to sample because it is so good. So we're going to be passing around. This is an American example of a few years ago, you would probably call it an ESB. I'll be going into that, but that's not really a style anymore other than in America. So Firestone Walker, I believe they're owned by Duval now. Is that right? Does anyone remember that? Yeah, they sold a few years ago, but it's to another good chain, so you can still like them. But this is an American style of ESB. I forget which one is the English one. David Firestone, I think. Yes. Yeah, he's an English guy, and so he brought with him. They're based kind of in Paso Robles, but he brought a lot of real traditional English brewing techniques with him. And if you know anything about the DBA, they actually do this weird like barrel fermentation, or they used to anyway. But it's 5% ABV, real classic in my mind of like an American style ESB. So I thought I'd wet everyone's whistle. One of my favorite beers here. All right, so if you want to make an English pale ale from scratch, you must first invent the universe, is what I imagine Carl Sagan would say after a few beers. So I want to go a little bit into why do beer styles exist generally, and then specifically why is English pale ale, right? So in my mind, there's 4 things that go into a lot of beer styles: water, predominantly, terroir, kind of just this general the stuff around you, taxes, and marketing. And I'll get into those a little bit. So in England, you've probably heard the water in England is very hard. So there's this Burton-on-Trent style water, super duper high minerals, especially calcium sulfate, I believe. And so the effect of that was that the type of malts that worked with that kind of water chemistry tended to be paler. And so that's why you got a lot of paler beers. It kind of depends on the mineral composition. Sometimes it favors darker beers, but generally the type of water permitted lighter beers than in other regions. For the most part, the water chemistry, before people really understood things like pH and chemistry and all of that, really dictated, they just made stuff until it tasted good. And so in England, that just happened to be lighter beers, and it happened to accentuate the hops a lot. I'm going to be going over that, but San Diego...
6,000 miles.
Yeah. San Diego actually has a closer, and it depends on time of year, how much drought we have, et cetera. But we're closer to Burton than a lot of other styles, because our water is actually pretty hard. In a drought year, what happens is all the water concentrates, so it gets even harder. In a rainy year and in the wet season, it gets diluted and it gets less hard. Or if you're coming from the desal plant, you get reverse osmosis water. So,
Hey, Derek. Jack wants to know if you could explain the double and DBA.
the double barrel ale. So you should look a picture of it online. The old, I don't know if they still do this actually, or they do. I don't know if it's the whole batch or part of the batch or what, but they actually have big barrels that they ferment the beer in. And the short of it is it ferments into 2 different barrels, and then they finish the fermentation. So it's actually fermented in 2 barrels, why it's called double barrel ale. Yeah, you look it up. It's actually literal barrels that it kind of cascades into. So terroir, relatively temperate climate in England. It's really good for growing hops, really good for growing barley. Soil conditions provide a mild earthy bitterness. So if you think about a lot of English hops, you kind of think of earthy, spicy, not too intense. Basically, it's just the region in England is really good, and the soil is really good, and it's just a good ingredient for beer. All right, so this is one of my favorite things. So the history of brewing is 40% chemistry, 40% tax evasion, 10% marketing, and then 10% actually making beer. So, as you know, England has a rather extensive imperial legacy, and one of the ways they paid for that was by taxing beer. One of the first things they did is they taxed malt. So the amount of malt that you used, you'd have a higher tax. So brewers, brewers are consummate tax evaders. So what they would do is they would try to get as many beers as possible out of a single batch of malt. That's why, and I'll get into this a little bit, but that's why you frequently get like multiple levels of beer out of a single batch. You'll get like a barley wine, and then a strong pale, and then like a standard bitter. So they're trying to get as much as they can out of it. The next thing is, like during World War II especially, a lot of the base ingredients were rationed. And so they just couldn't make strong beers if they wanted to. Or if they did make a strong beer, that was it. That was like their whole allotment for the year, right? So they brought the ABV down as much as they could to try to just make more beer. And then the people in England just got used to drinking real low ABV stuff. So, yeah, tax evasion. You look it up, places like Belgium, Germany. A lot of these classic styles are the ABV that they are, because everyone loves high ABV stuff. This is true throughout history, right? But the reason they don't always make that is just because it's too expensive, because of ingredients, because of taxes, et cetera. So they get around that. They make lighter ABV stuff. Final one is marketing. Like I said, the other main factor of beer is marketing. Basically, as beer styles became kind of renowned in different regions, marketers distribute the marketing branded beers as distinctive products linked to certain places. For example, Bristol ales, London porters, Yorkshire bitters, regional specialties. Brewers are going to brew what sells, and if you can have a good hook behind it, it'll sell more. Later breweries would often produce specific variations of these beer styles, like pale ale or bitters. You'd market them as their best one, right? So we have best bitter. That's why you have like extra, ESB, extra strong bitter. Basically, it's just ways to say like, oh, this is our best product. This is the extra strong version of our product, et cetera. And so the hot secret is that the history you know about IPA is mostly just marketing. They rarely brewed it and shipped it to India because that was a big expense. And brewers, as you know, don't like big expenses. They did, however, love the story. And so they used that story to sell the beer locally. And most of the IPA ever produced in England was consumed in England because it was a great story. Brewers love great stories. Consumers love great stories. So IPA, maybe they did send some to India at some point, but for the most part, they just sold it locally.
I have a question. Around what year did IPA start coming around?
So the question was, when did IPA start? Well, historically,
Or start getting popular, I mean, sure, they were probably on the
yeah, so, yeah.
making it mainstream.
Originally, this was something that was in like the 17 and 1800s in England. Think about when England kind of controlled India, and they had all these people that like were over there because they were officers in the Navy or whatever, right? And so they wanted a taste of home. India's not a great place to grow barley or hops. And so they would ship beer to India. And so the idea was that you made it extra strong so it would survive the sea journey to India from England. And so that just kind of caught on, and the people in England realized that the people there liked strong beer, so they just had a good story for a strong beer that people liked. In the United States, IPA probably got popular, I don't know, 90s. San Diego was kind of a big scene in that regard, yeah.
So I always heard that the story was this for the sailors to drink on their way to India so that the beer wouldn't go bad on the way there.
Yeah, I think the sailors are kind of a rum gang. I think they look down on beer a little bit. All right, so the next beer. I'm going to need some help with this. Also, if there's any DBA left over, I didn't get one, so. Yeah, we'll put it right there. Thank you.
Now you have to drink 1.5.
Oh, thanks. All right. Thank you. Oh, you can pass this guy around too. All right, so Fuller's London Pride, if you look up in the BJCP guidelines, it is, I got it, thanks. It is listed as one of the classic examples for the best bitter style. Now, the big challenge is that, I'm going to be getting into this, 3 levels of English pale ales. I guarantee you will never see an exported standard bitter. They just won't do it because it won't transport well. The best case scenario is that you go and you drink one locally and fresh because they don't get distributed very far. Your next best option is a best bitter, which you will see exported sometimes. The export bottled version of Fuller's London Pride is actually 0.6% ABV higher than the draft version. So the draft version is 4.1%, the bottled version is 4.7%. Even Sierra Nevada does this. The bottled and draft versions are different ABVs. So this is a classic example. If you ever go to London, there are Fuller's pubs all over the place. Now, this isn't a thing that exists in the US because it's illegal, but in the UK, you can have what they call tied houses. And so a place like Fuller's won't necessarily own the establishment, but they will have exclusive rights to distribute there. So you'll go to a place and literally only Fuller's products will be there, which I love the Fuller's products, so that's not a bad thing. But there's a lot of Fuller's pubs all over London. I think the further out, you'll see other breweries. But when you're in London, I think it's a real treat. Get some cask Fuller's. It's real nice. Yeah. So one thing you maybe notice if your palate is tuned, I notice a kind of a caramely oxidative character. And so I'm going to get into this a little bit later. But a lot of the reason that Americans think of caramel and English beers is because shipping it all the way over from England, especially out here on the West Coast, they get a little old, they get a little oxidized. That can add kind of a little caramely note to it. So for years, the style really emphasized the caramel character. And then I would say in the last decade, they revised the guidelines, said mea culpa. That's actually not really a definitive characteristic. It's just that all of the samples we ever tried were oxidized. And so don't buy into the caramel hype so much. All right, so BJCP, it is now Category 11, British Bitter. It was formerly Category 8, English Pale Ale. They made a distinction between the styles now because I forget the exact category, but there's now another category that includes things like Australian Pale Ale, Golden, English Golden, a few other pale British styles that aren't necessarily bitters. So they've really diversified the categories for British beers. And now the bitters, they get a category all to themselves. So the family of British bitters grew out of English pale ales as a draft product from the late 1800s. It's usually served very fresh under no pressure. Beer engine, hand pump. From cellar temperatures. Now, cellar temperatures is actually like 50 degrees. So it's not room temperature, right? Cellar temperature is actually quite cool. It's not ice cold refrigerated like American beers get served, but it is still, pretty cool. That really accentuates a lot of the hop and esters, allows a lot more flavor expression, which in low ABV beers like this is a good thing, because if they were very cold, you would hardly taste anything at all. Bottled and keg versions are often higher ABV, like I mentioned, the London Pride, higher ABV in the bottle. Slightly different character and balance. The guidelines in BJCP are referring to the real ale version, so served from a cask, not the exported or bottled versions. Like I mentioned, don't emphasize the caramel component of the styles. Exports are usually oxidized, a little bit old, which increases the caramel-like flavor. So when looking through the 3 different bitter styles, there are more similarities than there are differences. In fact, if you looked at any one of them blind without seeing the exact numbers, you might not even know which one you're looking at, because they are about 95% the same. So there's a lot of similarities between each of these styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the similarities, and then afterward I'm going to break out kind of what the differences are. And there aren't that many. So the malt profile, all 3 styles have a balanced malt backbone, typically light to medium malts. Maltiness is described as biscuity, nutty, bready, and cracker-like. But it shouldn't overshadow the hop character. You'll see them make the comment like things should be balanced, but the hop should shine a little bit more, is basically the gist of all of the descriptions you're about to read. Balance is a very good characteristic for this style. Does someone have a question? David asked, Maris Otter.
No, that's all right. I'll just stand over here doing nothing.
Answer, yes. Yeah, so Maris Otter is more broadly frequently kilned to what you would call pale ale malt. I imagine you could probably find like a lager kiln Maris Otter. I've never seen it. But it is a distinctive English style, very biscuity, nutty. It's like super classic characteristic English malt flavor. So yeah, I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But yeah, Maris Otter. This is actually a guy from Crisp, one of my favorite maltsters, floor malting Maris Otter. So hop profile. So the extra TLDR, too long didn't read version of all of this is that you can use whatever you want. Just go for it, man. You can use American hops. You can use English hops. The guide is actually very broad for what hops you can use. However, when I'm making an English pale ale, I can make an American pale ale all day using whatever I want. If I'm making an English pale ale, I'll stick with American an English pale ale. I'll stick with American hops because otherwise I'm just kind of making another American pale ale, right? So in that case, the English style hops, distinct English character is usually floral, woody, citrus, spicy, a little bit herbal. Bitterness should be clean and crisp, contributing to a dry finish without being harsh or overwhelming. Once again, well balanced. Flavor profile. So, separate from hops, these English styles usually have a lot of ester expression. So yeast character, I usually get a lot of like apple, maybe pear, maybe peach, palm fruits. So I think in my mind, the ester expression from the yeast is a major characteristic, just as balanced as the malt, just as balanced as the hops. You want that yeast character in there. Once again, bitterness should not overpower the malt. Esters are hop in balance. Color. So they're all generally in the same pale amber to copper. This color, basically. Sometimes they can be pretty pale. Sometimes they can be kind of dark. And you'll see the ESB, the strong bitter, is kind of the darkest. The straight bitter is the kind of the lightest, but they're all kind of in the same ballpark. So carbonation, this is a big one. For the most part, low, moderate carbonation. The canned and bottled versions will have a higher carbonation. You want a real smooth mouthfeel, again, allowing hop and malt to shine through. Low head is okay. If you've ever been to an English pub, you'll notice they fill it like to the very brim, right? And like not a bubble to be seen. I think the idea is something like they're very adamant that like not a single drop is wasted when you're paying for the darn thing. So if you get a millimeter of bubbles, that's a millimeter of beer that you're not getting, right? So they'll fill that thing all the way to the tippy top. So it's not uncommon to see basically no head on these things. And generally because it's pretty low carbonated. Drinkability. So all three of these styles designed to be easy drinking and sessionable. So you have this idea, you and your friends go out to the pub, you're each buying drinks. You know, you buy the first round, your friend buys the next. Last thing you know, you're 6 pints deep. You're walking home, you get up for work the next day. In America, you can't really do that because the beers you're drinking is like 9% ABV, right? You're barely making it to the parking lot. But over there, when you're drinking 3.5%, you can have 6 pints because you're mostly drinking water. Really good tasting water, but it's so low ABV. So if you ever see a Brit challenge you like, oh, you Americans can't drink 6 pints and walk home, you know, maybe challenge them to an American pint drinking contest and see how they do. But the whole idea is that you can drink a lot of them because, you know, you can still wake up and go to work the next day. All right, next one, another one of my favorites. And I think this is also like a nitro pour, so it's like a pub style pint. So this I think would fall under a strong bitter or ESB style. 5% ABV, although it is the same ABV as the Fullers. So why is this one an ESB and the other one's just a best bitter? Because that's how they decided to sell it. So the really nice thing is that this beer isn't really that hard to find. They're actually pretty good about distributing it. I've seen it at Bevmo. I've seen it at Total Wine. Comes in these nice 16-ounce like pub draft cans. I should try it. I don't know what good condition it is. Apparently Churchill's has it on draft sometimes. But yeah, you can tell because of the nitro, it's got that real smooth and light body to it. It's not real heavy. It feels like the kind of thing you could just have like pint after pint of. I love drinking it. It's a great beer. Good to have on hand. All right, so for the styles themselves, ordinary bitter, 11A. Overall impression, low gravity alcohol and carbonation make it an easy drinking session beer. I think all three of them say the same thing. This is an easy drinking session beer. Malt profile can vary in flavor and intensity. Should never override the bitter impression. So 25 to 35 IBU, 8 to 14 SRM, OG 1030 to 1039, final gravity 107 to 111, 3.2 to 3.8%. All right, so best bitter. Overall impression, a flavorful yet refreshing session beer. Some examples can be more malt balanced, but this should not override the overall bitter impression. So IBU, 25 to 40. You can see it's a whopping 5 IBU higher on the high end. SRM, 8 to 16, so 2 more levels of darkness. Regional gravity, 1040 to 1048. Final gravity, 08 to 12. And it was 07 to 11. So, I mean, we're talking like tiny incremental changes between them. ABV 3.8 to 4.6. Strong bitter, a.k.a. ESB, what I like to call enjoyable Springer beers. IBU 30 to 50. So you can see the low end, it was 25 to 35, 25 to 40, and then 30 to 50. So a little bit more every single time. SRM, 8 to 18. So we went from a high end of 14 to 16 to 18. Yeah, so pull a Kelsey McNair, brew one beer, and submit it to every category, and then win them all. Final gravity, 1010 to 1016. ABV, 4.6 to 6.2. So in America, this is usually what we experience because that's the strength that they would export. So like Old Speckled Hen, for instance, is 5%. If you've had a lot, I think Bass was like 5% or so. So a lot of these British beers in your mind that you've had in the past is in this range because that's just what you can export. So an average strength to moderately strong British bitter ale. Balance may vary between malt and hops to somewhat bitter, rather broad style that allows for considerable interpretation by the brewer. So this one I think is just like, yeah, do whatever. Do whatever. Make it taste kind of English. Use whatever hops you want. So what's different? What's different? Some of them go to 11. So really, it's just intensity. Like I said, it's all marketing, right? It's more or less kind of the same beer in 3 different strengths, sold different ways, right? So the standard bitters you would sell locally. You wouldn't export it very far. I mean, I'm talking like an hour drive from the brewery is the distance you're going, right? You're serving it fresh from a cask, beer engine, cellar temperature. Standard or your best bitter would be the ones that they're trying to sell at a premium because it's got a little more alcohol, it's got a little more hops, not a lot. Your ESB type would be the stuff that you're trying to export, but it's more or less all the same beer. So So the real secret is that a lot of British brewers, at least in the past, they do their mash sparging is in batches. So they'll mash their beer and then they'll rinse all the wort out, fill it back up again, rinse the wort out, fill it back up again, rinse the wort out, right? So everyone knows the first runnings you get out are very concentrated, extra strong. Second ones, or later in the sparge, weaker and weaker and weaker, right? So you'll take a chunk of your extra strong stuff, a chunk of your medium stuff, a chunk of your light stuff. You don't want to make a beer of just the light stuff because it doesn't really taste that good. You take a little bit of your strong stuff, a little bit of your medium stuff, and then your light stuff, that's your standard bitter. You take a little bit of your strong stuff, most of your middle stuff, a little bit of your light stuff, that's your best bitter. You take all strong stuff, that's your winter warmer, that's your barley wine, that's your whatever, right? So they take, this is getting around the taxes again. One batch of beer, multiple beers, multiple styles. It was all the same beer, more or less. So they call that party guile. All right, so now I'm going to pass around the one that I made. All right, so this is a style I've wanted to make for a long time, but I haven't because it's actually a lot of work to make a low-gravity beer. And if you're going to go through all the effort of making a beer, I think usually you just kind of go all the way, make a big beer. But I love low-gravity beers. This is especially a beer style that I don't know if I've ever actually had in the United States made locally. So this is a standard bitter. 3.5% ABV, or 3.6. I think it's the lowest ABV beer I've brewed that wasn't a Berliner Weiss. I think the next lowest beer I've brewed is a Berliner Weiss. And so this was my way of challenging myself of how can I make the most flavorful beer that I can with the least amount. So the recipe is roughly 90% floor malted Maris Otter from Crisp, 10% medium crystal malt, might have been Simpson's, might have been Crisp. It's all East Kent Golding hops. I mashed it at 154 degrees for 60 minutes, and it's one packet of SO4. So SO4, I believe, is the same as 007, which is the same as Y yeast something, but it's the Whitbread yeast, also known as the Dry English. The other classic yeast strain is 002, which is the Fuller strain. So I designed this just a beer you can have multiple rounds of. That's why I call it round and round. I also carbonated it pretty low. Thanks. All right, so when you're building your recipe for an English bitter, what are we looking for? Characteristic ingredient: pale ale, amber, crystal malt, maybe a touch of dark malt for color. You can use sugar adjuncts, corn, flaked corn, flaked wheat, torrefied wheat. English finishing hops, traditional. Any hops are fair game. Like I said, you can just you can use whatever you want, really. If you do use American hops, maybe go a little bit lighter than an American pale ale. Characterful British yeast. I would say of all the things, make sure you have a characterful British yeast. Otherwise, people think you're just making an American pale ale. Yeah, so really just follow your heart. There's a malt literally called amber malt. So it's like that kind of mid, like 50 Lovabond specialty toasted malt. Kind of like maybe like Victory or like that. It's not a caramel malt. It's not a base malt. It's not a roasted malt. It's that like kind of upper toasted specialty malt. I'm going to go over that a little bit. All right, so the water. Burton-on-Trent style, like I mentioned earlier. Very hard, specifically calcium sulfate. It accentuates the malt character, has a dry, crisp finish for the hops. San Diego water is closer to Burton profile than a lot of other styles. Like I mentioned, it does kind of depend on the time of year, how much drought we're in. If we're in more of a drought, in a drier time of year, the water gets more concentrated and has a more mineral character to it. During the rainy season, it gets diluted a bit. You can, however, just kind of assume it's going to be pretty mineral heavy. Kind of the reason why San Diego got renowned for its hoppy beers, right? So because our water accentuated hoppy styles, we just made stuff that tasted good. Very classic history there, right? You make what tastes good, you sell what you can sell, right? San Diego had water that helped sell hoppy beers, and so that's what we made. So what I do if I'm not using like reverse osmosis water or something, I'm looking to really accentuate the hop profile, I'll add just a half a teaspoon of gypsum in my mash per 5 gallons. If I'm using reverse osmosis water, I'll add a whole teaspoon. So I used to go real down the rabbit hole of weighing it down to the gram and this and that and the other, but I don't know. I have a kid now. I don't have it in me, so I kind of eyeball it by the half teaspoon. All right, so malt. What you'll want to use is pale ale malt. More specifically, Maris Otter. Just has that real nice character that a lot of people are looking for in an English pale ale. It's toasty, biscuity. If you really want to shell out for it, the floor malted is like turning that up to 11. It just really accentuates the kind of like toasty, biscuity character. It is decently expensive, so I don't know. I think it can't be beat. Oh yeah. Well, most of the ingredients for this beer came from SoCal homebrewing. Shoot for I think maybe like 10% crystal. I mean, honestly, it's what you prefer, right? The lighter crystals have, I think, kind of more of like a honey character, whereas the darker crystals have more of like a molasses character. So you just use the ones that you like the best. I use the medium ones. I think it has a good balance. You can also look into using a little bit of biscuit or aromatic malt. Another thing you can do, torrefied wheat or flaked corn. I think it is actually pretty common to use flaked corn in a British brewery. Because like I said, they're kind of cheap, and they'll do whatever they can to get the most value. So actually, I find corn adds a nice, I don't know how to describe it other than a corny sweetness. But if you've ever tried a beer that you know has corn in it, you'll be able to pick it out. And I think it's actually kind of a nice flavor if used in a low amount. And it's actually in a lot of the English styles, or the English brewers use it. You can also use just a little pinch of like a chocolate malt. I'm quite fond of. If I don't use a lot of crystal, I'll just use. I mean, literally, I'll take a pinch of chocolate malt or something and kind of like sprinkle it in the grains when I'm milling it, and it'll get you the color that you want. You're looking for that amber color. So the hops, let me just pick your favorite. Like I mentioned, if you're going to make an English bitter, I like to use English hops because otherwise I'm just making an American pale ale, and I do that all the time. So Fuggle, I am not especially fond of Fuggle. I find it super earthy. A lot of people do like that. East Kent Goldings. The beer that I passed around is all East Kent Goldings. It's one of my favorite hops. Spicy honey floral. Challenger, spicy cedar, green tea, Target, sage, citrus spice, North Down, spicy floral pine. So you see a lot of the same descriptions in these English hops. That's the terroir I was talking about. Spicy, floral, piney, earthy, tea. That seems very appropriate for an English thing, right? Tea. And yeast. So every yeast supplier has like 8 different English strains. A lot of American breweries, one way or another, started using an English yeast strain because that was what was available. So a lot of American legacy beers started with a kind of an English style yeast strain. Honestly, it's up to you. Experiment, find one you like. I think some of the most common ones, WLP 002, Y yeast 1968. It's the fuller strain. It's kind of a lower attenuation. WLP 007, Y yeast 1098, SO4, that dry yeast SO4. It's that Whitbread strain. That's what I made this with. Ferment it in the high 60s. English yeasts can handle a little bit more temperature than a lot of other yeast strains and kick out that character that you're looking for. They also are really good flocculators. So you'll see, I call it egg drop soup. So if you've ever seen English strain fermenting, you'll just see chunks floating through there. It's just big chunks that you don't see in other yeast strains. So my tip, if you're going to make a low ABV beer, I like to shoot for the higher end of the OG range and the higher end of the FG range. Because when you're brewing low ABV, there's just not a lot there. You want to try to get as much as you can, right? So I shoot for the higher end of gravity, mash real high. Because even if you're using a low attenuating yeast, it's still going to ferment it down pretty low. And then, yeah, so even a low attenuating yeast can go too far in a low ABV beer. So you want to try to like give yourself as much room as possible to kind of like come down to the ceiling. And then that way you have kind of a fuller experience than, you know, if you shot low and then went low, it'll just kind of be water, right? More of a seltzer than anything. All right, so that's it. English Pale Ales. I hope you enjoyed the beers. Any questions? There's probably still more beer around if you want some more. I want to give a big shout out to Ruler, rest in peace. They had one of my favorite beers. It was called Pub Crawler. It was a ESB that I think just was, it hit all those English notes that you're looking for. They had it on nitro a lot, which was a real treat. And so I'm real sad that they're gone because they made one of my favorite beers right now. I believe that Pure Project has a pub ale on as of like this last week. So if you're looking for more, go check out Pure Project. They got some stuff hot off the presses.
Hey, Derek.
Of course, I walk up to the front and there's a question in the back. And it's standing there all night.
While you're walking to the back, I'll ask Derek one question from Jack.
Getting my exercise in.
Jack wants to know,
On
Derek,
the Pure Project note,
never mind.
they've typically had some pub ales, but also they put in a beer engine. A couple of months ago, Pure Project Vista put in a beer engine, and they've been doing, I think it's usually Thursday nights, they've been doing a cask. We got there a little late the other night at 9, and it was already gone. So I would get there earlier on in the evening, but I think that's really cool that they're bringing back casks. And usually they'll have some regular kegs of that, too. So if you miss the cask, they seem to usually have some kind of pub ale, SBE, something along those lines, even if you miss the cask.
I think Louis had a question from the
so Jack wants to know if
Zoom gang.
Jack's asking if there's any good U.S. or just local examples of any of these beers.
Double barrel ale is probably the best one.
Firestone.
You can find it, although less easily now. I was able to find it at Total Wine. I honestly haven't seen a lot of well-distributed English-style American-made beers.
This doesn't help Jack, but locally we have New English, and their ESB is fantastic, and you can still get it on cask too. So don't overlook New English.
So take a trip to San Diego, head up New English. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Cheers. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up.